All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Mathilde, co-founder and CEO of Front. Over the years, I've shared my journey as a leader and as a founder, but really everything I've learned so far has been by talking to people that have more experience than me and that are wiser than me. And this is what I'm going to be doing today. I'm here today with Dan, the CEO of DocuSign. Dan is known for low ego leadership. And since that's one of our values at Front, I'm excited to hear his take on it today. Thank you, Dan, for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So you've been the CEO of DocuSign for 4 years, if I'm correct. And before we start, any
4.5. I want full credit. 4.5.
4.5, even better. So I'd love to ask you, what do you like the most about this job?
Well, good question. DocuSign for me has been an opportunity to see tremendous growth. And one thing that comes with business growth is the development of your people. And so the real joy I get out of work is seeing the people on my team develop in their careers, achieve sort of their aspirations. At this point in my career, I've pretty much achieved what I'd like to achieve. So I'm less sort of driven by my personal sort of accomplishments, if you will, and more by watching those people develop in their careers. And the other part is that I'm still pretty competitive. So I like winning in the marketplace. And DocuSign's had a pretty good run for all of those 4.5 years. A lot of good success, and that's also really rewarding for me as well.
Great. I've heard from many people that you're a great leader, and I think you've probably spent 25 years in leadership positions. And I'm curious if you have any philosophy on leadership that you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, I mean, there's a slightly geeky, you get a little geeky here, term that I like to use to sort of simplify how I evaluate leaders in the company, or when I'm interviewing people about potentially bringing to the company, which is sort of combining 3 different factors that I think are really critical. Well, the first one is whether people have the right sort of skills and smarts to be effective in their job. The second one is, are they able to manage their ego? And so that they're able to be a person that manages their ego well, focuses on the team's results as opposed to their individual results and credit. And then the last is simply how hard they work and how much they apply themselves. And the formula that I like to use with those 3 things is I take the S, or the smarts and skills, divide that by the ego, because you want to do a better job minimizing that, and then raise that quotient to the power of how hard you work. And you can play around with numbers like 1 to 5, and you can do your own assessment and sort of see. And there's sort of interesting things if you play around with the math. But the key thing for me is to realize that to some extent, you can get smarter and you can develop more skills, but we're all sort of given some certain level of capabilities that we have, and some better for some jobs. But once you have that, the parts you can really control is how you manage your ego and how you really apply yourself and how hard you work. And so I try to encourage people to say, that's where you should put your focus in developing yourself as an individual contributor, but particularly as a manager, is, are you going to be successful by those 2 variables you can control?
And I'm curious, how do you teach people or help people work on their ego?
So that's the part that's interesting, because sometimes it's easy for people. Some people naturally, they have high EQs. Their personality is to be supportive of other people. They get their joy out of watching other people develop. So it's easy for them to do it. And some people, it's really, really difficult. And the thing I would tell you is that we're all on a journey. And when I try to talk to people about ego management, if you will, I try to go back and say, hey, let me tell you, I think today I've gotten to a point on a 1 to 5 scale, which is the scale I use. I've gotten to about a 4. I think I do a pretty good job of putting the organization first, the customers first, the other employees first, over myself. But when I was 23, I'm talking to a young person, I go, I probably was a 1 or 2 on ego. I was very focused on my own career. I was competitive. I was ambitious, and I was not great at that. I had some early management jobs where I don't think very good as a manager, and very sensitive that I was managing people much older than I was. And I just didn't have an awareness of how to do that well. So you sort of start off and say, I've been there. If someone's struggling, I've been where you are. It takes some work, but what it mostly takes is awareness and focus. And so that's what I try to tell them stories about. Here's places that I wasn't a star, or other, not just me, so it could be other stories of other people. And here's what they did to be more successful here. So that's one. And the second big thing is giving people feedback. And I always say, feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to explain to people why you see them underperforming on the ego dimension, and say, this is how I saw you interact with your teammates, and this is what other people say when they come out of interactions with you. And this is why they maybe feel bruised or not supported, whatever it might be. And giving people that direct, and really critical feedback on how they're showing up is I think the only way you can really help people. It's not about book learning. You can read stories, but it really is about that intensely personal development.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that we also do at Front is every all hands, so weekly, company-wide, we have this thing called Stumble of the Week. And so anyone that has made a mistake can hear the learnings. And I think then you create an environment where people are more comfortable talking about the thing that they've not done well and what they've learned with it. So I also believe that ego is something that you can work on. But it's a hard one, because I think it's also something that's very entrenched. So
personal. I tell you, I love your story about the stumble, because I think humility, I always describe, that's the sort of the secret power that allows you to overcome your ego issues, is to be able to get comfortable with your own challenges and your own shortcomings. And once you stop, I always say at McKinsey, I work at McKinsey, we always talked about the phenomenon. A lot of people are trying to prove they're the smartest person in the room all the time. And, that's not great ego management. So you need help to be able to say, what, people who aren't trying to show that they're smarter than everyone else all the time, those are the people who are crushing it on the ego management dimension. Let's celebrate that. And your stumble is a perfect example for how to do that.
On the topic of leadership, one thing that I've heard is that at DocuSign you have a commitment that is every person deserves a great manager, and every manager deserves the tools to become great. So I'm curious if you can walk me through some of the tools that help managers become great.
Yeah, so huge topic, and we try to be not too long-winded. I think the first piece is management training. So one of the things we realized early on is we promoted a lot of people into be first-time managers as we were growing. And we, in the early days, I think we made the mistake of just assuming, well, if you're good at that job, if you're a sales development rep and you're good at that, now you're managing other SDRs, you'll just tell them what you did. And of course, that's naive. And in fact, people could be great at a job, but not have those skills. So some of that is around actually feedback and coaching is one of the most important modules we talk about within that, management training piece. Another thing I think is really important is that we have increasingly diversity, and we want to have increasingly diversity in our ranks, an area that tech has not been as successful as we'd like, whether that's gender diversity, whether that's racial diversity. And so we do a lot of our management training where we embed the concept of how do you create an inclusive environment? How are you successful as a manager for people that are different than you are? And again, particularly people early in their careers, they sometimes don't have that same sensitivity. The example I used before about myself, I said I was managing people that were significantly older than I was in my first managerial job. And I did a terrible job of thinking about how they were different than I was and how their motivations were different. I did not create an inclusive environment. I created, something far less than that. So those are kinds of things that I think we do. I'd also say the one thing we heavily leverage is surveys. So we do a lot of employee surveys that I try to do my job better by understanding, but then we also get information from managers and say, hey, here's how your department or here's how your team and your group are feeling about things. And we use those things as spotlights to say, you have an opportunity where you're underperforming. You have opportunities, do more of the good, definitely focus, do more of the good, but here's an opportunity where you might not be crushing it. And here's how those surveys can feedback for you. And then the last thing that I would say, this sometimes gets missed a lot, Mathilde, but I think the most important thing you can do for managers to make them great managers is have incredibly high expectations for them being great managers. Right. And I think we get so much so we can be apologetic and excuses for people, and that's difficult. And one of the things we say is that if you have a direct report team, your job is to make sure that each one of them is doing the work of their life here at DocuSign. And I'm not saying everyone will be 100% successful. Not every single employee here do we get there. But as a manager, if you're not going to work every day, saying your job is to make each of my reports have this the best place they've ever worked, then that's not a high enough expectation. You need to go to work with that goal. If you, well, this person's really difficult, or this person, your job is to be successful, making it 10. And you won't always be set, but if you don't hold that expectation really high, I think we give people an excuse to not be great managers. So that would be the last tool that I think is important.
That makes sense. And another thing I've heard, as you can see, I've heard a lot of things about you and leadership at DocuSign, is that you personally take a lot of time to get to know employees, and you believe that it's an important
Mhm.
part of helping them have the best possible job. And I'm curious, during the past year and a half where we couldn't travel, how did you build these connections, and specifically at scale, when you are almost at 6,000 employees, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. That's right. So the first answer is, so this has been the worst, year and a half pretty much in my professional career, because one of the big reasons why is I haven't been able to do that. Our business has been thriving, but it has been so difficult for me personally. Part of it is just my own natural style. Is I'm outgoing and I like interacting with people, and I get energy. A big source of my energy is interacting with my colleagues. So it's really difficult for me trying to do it in this medium. I prefer we were having this conversation. I wish we were sitting face to face. It would be easier for me in a lot of ways. But so in developing those relationships and investing in the people, we've had to adjust. So I'll tell you a couple of things we've done. One is we've done more frequent sort of all hands communications and town hall meetings where I'm just actually interacting and speaking with folks. It doesn't get me quite as much. I get Q&A at the end, but I think it helps a lot for the employees that are saying there's a leadership feeling of, void, where we're not getting to see Dan or other executives, out. And so particularly in international offices where that was a big part of our rhythm. If I was going to be in those offices, we'd go see customers, and then I'd spend time with employees. We'd have some social time together as well, and really feeling a sense of sort of an intensity. And so you can't replace that if you can't, get your butt on a plane and get to those places. But we've done some other things that I think are important. One of them is we've actually done a lot of informal things like happy hours with groups or trivia contests and all the things that people are trying to do. And I try to join them. So not every single meeting in the company, but I've dramatically increased the number of events that I attend around like team meetings. And so I've told people, you're having a team meeting and you want me to show up for 10 minutes and give a quick update on things going on in the company and take questions, all day long. Because remember, I saved a lot of time by not having to fly around and travel to all those offices. So I have capacity to do a lot of half-hour calls. So I actually try to fill my schedule with meeting with smaller groups where you can have that interaction. And then the last thing, if there's like a silver lining, and there are not a lot, but one silver lining to COVID is we used to have an event where all new employees would come to what's called Discovering DocuSign. We fly them to Seattle from wherever in the world they join. That's where the company was founded and still our largest office, even though headquarters is now in San Francisco. Fly them to Seattle and they go through several days of Discovering DocuSign, and different people come in and talk to them. If I was able to be in Seattle during Discovering DocuSign, of course, would always do that. But the reality is, as the months go by, I don't get to very many Discovering DocuSigns. But in a virtual world, I go to every single one. So every new employee that joins goes to a couple-day event called Discovering DocuSign, and they meet me and they interact with me, and I answer questions and tell them about the company, and I talk about our values. And at the end, I tell them all the same thing. This is my email address. If you ever have a question where you're not sure how your job connects to our values, and you talk to your manager and you're not getting the answer you need, call me or email me, and I'm your resource to make sure you feel part of DocuSign and successful here. And people say, how can you do that with 6,000 people? Well, the vast majority of people, of course, don't call you and follow up, because the vast majority of people were doing stuff right at DocuSign and they're launched well and they don't need me, right? But for those people that get lost there, or for those people that want that little safety net, it's actually reassuring. And some people reach out. And then, by the way, when they reach out, oftentimes they help me see a problem where we're not doing something well to get their job aligned with our values, right? So those are examples of things that you can do more of even in the pandemic.
One thing that strikes me when we're chatting is you seem to be a very empathetic person, and one of the things that I've learned from the past year and a half is more than ever, people in the company needed this empathy. I'm curious if you have any tips on how you can teach people to be empathetic, and just what you can do, because I think it's a great value to bring to the workplace.
Yeah. So yeah, everyone's different, right? And how they, build their capabilities and awareness on things. I'll tell you a little bit about my path there. Some of these things might not work for other people. The first thing I say is have children. And when you have children, two great things happen. One, you now have the ability to love someone more than you love yourself. Some people probably had that capability beforehand. I never had that capability beforehand. And then of course it was magically easy as soon as my first son was born. So that's a no-brainer. If you can, might not fit in all your lives as an option, but if you do have, that's a great one. Second one is, I think, encourage the people around you that really care about you to give you feedback, and particularly give you feedback when you miss stuff and feedback on your insensitivities, right? And so, I've got a long history of getting feedback from, people I was in relationships with that cared enough about me to make me aware of my shortcomings. So I think you have to be open to it, though. I mean, I think, you have to encourage people that you're open to it, and then you have to be open to it. And then, if you don't ever act on it or show any progress, people stop giving you feedback because it's a chamber that's just echoing and you're not listening. So it takes work, and you have to sort of focus on doing it. Again, we talked about our development. When I was 25, I wasn't building a lot of empathy, and I wasn't listening to a lot of feedback, on my shortcomings in that field. So yeah, make it important. Have people around you that you care about, know that you want them to share that when you have the misses. And that's where it's really is fundamentally awareness. People are good people. People want to be helpful. They want to do the right thing. When they don't appear to have empathy, it's usually because they're just not aware. It's an ignorance problem as opposed to a jerk problem. There are a few jerks in the world that are just going to be jerks anyway, but that's, you got to assume good intent. And assume most people are coming from a place that they want to develop empathy. They just need help because we're all, human and we're all imperfect in that way.
Well, I'm very glad. I had a daughter 9 months ago.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that it will make me it has already made me a more.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Earlier in the chat, you mentioned when we were talking about how to coach managers to be great managers, you mentioned that diversity was important. And I mean, as you know, in the past year, we've witnessed a lot of racial injustice. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you said that it was important that we aggressively drive the education process around these topics. And so I'm curious how you brought awareness at DocuSign on this topic, and why you think this education is so important for diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, well, so multiple reasons, but so let me start off by saying, everyone likes to talk about their when they've achieved something they feel proud of. They talk about that end state, and sometimes we forget to talk about the journey. That's important for people to understand. You don't get intimidated by someone saying we've accomplished all these great things, or we've achieved some training goals or some diversity and inclusion goals. How do they get there? So I'll be clear, we're all on these journeys that I talk about, and I had a huge gap in my awareness over the last 3 years. I mean, I've dramatically changed my perspective around social justice aspects that we've seen, in so many ways, particularly in the last year and a half. And I also think that my consciousness was a big gap first, but my ability to get mature and understand the complexity of some of these issues and severity was big. So if people out there, if you're saying you don't get it, it's okay. The water's warm, come on in, start the journey though, and start pushing yourself to understand. So like at DocuSign, we started off with communication. And we say, we have to be able to talk about these things. And we have a very good, transparent, environment. People can ask questions when we do our all hands, the whole company's there. And people can ask really aggressive, we encourage the tough, aggressive questions. And that pushes me and the rest of our leadership to say we need to address the things that are on the minds of our employees. So communication was big. We allocated a lot of time to talk about things, particularly with the Black Lives Matter situation and sort of the explosion of the awareness for so many of us were just missing. And now, of course, we think, how did I not see that? Second one, we talked about training. We're actually trying to put some of that D&I training in all of the managerial training and all of the individual training that we do, not have separate, we sort of said, instead of saying now we're going to do diversity training and have people come in and focus on that, we said, how do we integrate that over? I think it's more effective. And it also takes away some of the cynicism, right? Because people come into diversity training with their guard up saying, well, I'm not racist. And that's not a constructive way to start the conversation, but you understand why people would be defensive. Whereas if you embed it in the other programs, the guard's down and they're more open to it. So that's been a big focus, integrate that in our training. And the last thing is you got to take some actions at some point. It can't just be talk. So the kind of things we did is, one, we put a lot of money behind it and we put matches in place. So actually starting at the time of the Black Lives Matter sort of escalation last summer, we did some training, education. We had some speakers, and then we said let's fund some social justice organizations. And we said for employees that give money, the company will match all of their gifts, and then I personally would also match all their gifts. So they get $3 for every dollar that they would put forward. And we dramatically increased our giving. So that was fantastic to see. DocuSign has really stepped forward with that incentive to give more to these causes. And then the last piece, but maybe the most important, is we have to take the actions internally. So we started to publish all of our diversity information. So we now say every year we publish our success against our diversity goals and what our actual demographics are in the company, and with the adage that what gets measured and publicly measured gets managed. We're seeing significant improvement. We still have a long way to go, but we're seeing significant improvement in improving the diversity of our workforce.
I'm sad because we're almost at the end of our interview, and I'm learning so much, and I have so many more questions. I think I can afford 2 more questions. But thanks for sharing so transparently everything that you're doing and learning. If I'm not mistaken, I think after you sold Responses, you took 4 years to just be with your family. And I'm curious why you made the decision, and if you feel like that impacted the way you lead now.
Yeah, well, it was a really easy decision to make. We sold Responses. I'm a single father and had 2 sons full time. And I wasn't doing a great job being a public company CEO and a single dad, to be clear about it. And I thought, most of my career, I've been focusing on that first one. And so it was an opportunity, a wonderful gift to be able to focus on the other while they were still home before they'd eventually go off to university. And it was probably the best 4 years of my life as an adult anyway. It was a wonderful time to be close, with my boys, help them through some, kind of really formative issues of trying to become young men, and hopefully being able to, put a little positive stamp on the kind of young men they've become, which was great. And also they loved all the sport. They played soccer and lacrosse and sports I played when I was in college. So I got to go to all their games, and that was also just hugely rewarding. But in terms of whether it was a good decision, I mean, it was no question a good decision because I enjoyed it so much. I think it made me better when I came back to full-time work. I think back to your empathy point, dramatically increased empathy. One of the first things we did when I got to DocuSign was put in a 6-month parental leave program. And even though, be clear, I was taking care of much older children, I wasn't doing the hard work that people have to do when you have a 9-month old as you do. But I thought, wow, I mean, I grew up with a single mom, and I never had been aware of just sort of thinking about that. Like, this is so important. We need to support all of our parents in this phase. So my empathy around issues like that dramatically improved. And I think the last thing is it let me get comfortable that while I sort of used to define myself a lot around my professional success, I got comfortable to say, no, I'm just a person, and I'm Dan, and I'm proud of who I want to be. I'd like to make changes and get better on a lot of things. And now when I went back into a full-time building a company, it allowed me to even take my ego down another level and say, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about the other people, whether it's my kids, whether it's the company, other people's careers. I can really focus and just get excited about driving the success in that front. So I'm a little more aggressive. I think I'm willing to take a few more chances. And because I don't have to be afraid of failure, I've achieved what I want to achieve. And so now I want to help other people achieve what they're going to achieve, and I go harder. So that I think from that standpoint, it was a huge success for me. Encourage anyone that's fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do full-time, particularly dads, because I know people sometimes think it should be a mom thing, which is crazy. It's like dads as much or more, I think, than moms should be trying to figure out a way to really be focused on caregiving with their own kids.
My husband would love hearing this. I can't wait to listen to this interview. We're at the end of our time. Thank you so much, Dan. I got so much energy and I learned so much, and I'm sure that everyone that will listen to this interview will learn a lot. Thank you. It was really inspiring.
All right. Thanks for having me, Mathilde.